on to Senator Ruane. And
thank you, Justice Laffoy, and your team, and to the citizens who have taken part in this very important work over the past few months. It's very much appreciated, and I hope we can mirror the maturity and respect that you have spoke about in relation to the process so far. Many of my questions have been very much touched on in relation to Deputy Coppinger and Deputy Daly, but I might just kind of hone in a little bit more maybe on the uncertainty piece around Brian Murray's legal advice, and just ask that whether the Assembly, when he outlined to the Assembly that there was 3 possible consequences of a straight repeal, would it be fair to describe the Assembly's intentions was to copper-fasten option 1, which would be to give the Oireachtas absolute authority to legislate for abortion access and to prevent any pre-8th Amendment constitutional rights? So although there was 3 options and areas of uncertainty, that they were just making sure that they rule out the other 2, so that that can't actually be used or construed in any other way in terms of the uncertainty that he raises. In relation to my next question, why was the Assembly not given the option of voting to insert an express positive right to abortion access or to bodily autonomy in pregnancy? On a point of clarification, just for myself for understanding, I note that you describe in the report that the Assembly's intention was to give full control and exclusive authority to make law in this area, and I suppose it ties in a little bit with what Deputy Daly was saying in relation to the judiciary and their role. That obviously is very strong language, and I was wondering if you could clarify that the intention of the Assembly was to recommend that any abortion legislation passed by the Oireachtas would be immune from challenge from the courts. I felt that exclusive authority and full control was very strong language, and I'm just wondering if you could clarify that for me, please.
Thank you.
On the first question, I think I would agree with you that what the citizens were thinking of was copper fastening the position and not leaving any uncertainty there. And I think that's why they took the line they took. Incidentally, and this is just by the way, we had, after that session, we had a questions and answers session, and Brian Murray answered questions, and there is a transcript. We prepared a transcript subsequently of that. It's available if it's of any assistance. It may give some insight into the minds of the people who were asking the questions. But I agree that was their objective, to copper fasten. I suppose one has to be awfully careful about the terminology one uses in this context. And when we talk about sort of certainty and there not being any challenges open and all of that, what I have been thinking of is a constitutional challenge. In other words, that the Oireachtas, I would prefer, and I would hope the Oireachtas would not produce legislation which within a few weeks would be subject to proceedings in the High Court which claimed a declaration that section whatever it is of the Act is invalid having regard to the provisions of the Constitution. So it's to avoid a challenge of invalidity having regard to the terms of the Constitution that I'm concerned with. Of course, the courts must keep an eye on the legislature and ensure that the legislature is acting in accordance with law, and one doesn't suggest cutting that out. But I think if the Oireachtas is going down the road to amend the Constitution and to do so by way of legislation, it should strive to ensure that the legislation won't be the subject of a constitutional challenge. That's very much a personal view, I should add.
Just, sorry to come back in, just in relation to the other question about why the Assembly was not given the option of voting to insert an express positive right to abortion access or bodily autonomy.
That actually never arose, did it, Sharon?
I actually think it might have done. I think there's a reference to it maybe in the report. I think it was raised about female bodily autonomy being suggested, and it came up as well in the ancillary recommendations.
Yeah, it did. You see, the problem is we're not just talking about the female. And that is the issue there, it seems to me, that it obviously wasn't pressed, but it was the subject of some debate, now that you mention it. But I don't think the citizens asked to vote on it. I'm a bit unclear on that at this stage.
Yeah. So just as a point of clarity, the other issue, and Deputy Daly asked this earlier, so there was the decriminalisation was the one issue, and the second was the recognition and protection of female reproductive rights and autonomy. So it did come through in that ancillary exercise that we got the citizens to do, but didn't come through expressly when we were discussing the ballot paper. Yeah.
So in other words, just to be absolutely clear about that, the ancillary recommendations, the citizens on the very last day, on the 23rd of April, were given a document to fill out, and they were invited to fill it out and indicate what additional ancillary recommendations they would like the Oireachtas to consider. And the two that are mentioned there are decriminalisation and
female reproductive bodily autonomy.
And reproductive autonomy, yeah. So there were ancillary recommendations. I'm sorry, I've created a bit of confusion about that.
I'll have to